I'm very honored to be speaking at this Van Vreeswijk seminar series. I've always been a great admirer of Carl, and but I only met him one time. Uh, yeah, I was visiting him at René Descartes University. I think it was around 2010, and we talked about networks and things like that. And he made coffee for me, so I was very happy to meet him, and very sad that he passed away. Uh, so, but yeah, like you said, I was going to talk about the motor system. I focus on locomotion and the spinal cord and how the brain communicates with the spinal cord. Um, and In particular, the two questions that we work on at the moment is how the spinal cord generate locomotion, and in particular, how networks can produce this locomotion and stop it at any phase, basically, which I think is um, understanding that task that you can have as something rhythmic that you can stop and continue at your own volition at a later time is quite a mystery, and I think it holds a key to understanding how the movement is generated in general. It's something that has been people have been aware of for a long time. Posture follows movement like a shadow, as Sherrington poetically put it. But it has not been investigated that much in spinal motor research because of technical reasons. Um, and so this is where we are at the moment. I want to, before I get into this and the manifolds, I want to take a little step back and talk about you mentioned Hornsgaard. So I started working with the turtle, and the preparation that I work with is this, as you can see here in the video. This is a decapitated turtle. It means that it has no brain attached to the spinal cord. So this is a purely a spinal reflex. It's called a scratch reflex. You can initiate it by touching the skin. And the good thing is that we can stabilize it. And part of the reason that it has been difficult to make progress in understanding spinal circuitry is because it's so difficult to measure from the spinal cord during movement. There's all these vertebrae that move, and it's mechanically unstable. But the turtle has a very stable spinal cord. And I put in electrodes into the spinal cord during this motor program, and I saw something that changed my view of the spinal cord um, completely, and has never been the same since. So what I saw recording from the spinal cord was that, well, I guess I was expecting to see something very clock-like, so recording interneurons and motor neurons. I was expecting to see something very sort of deterministic, um, but what I saw was uh, almost the opposite. Illustrated here in these are conductance measurements, and it's a little hard to see. Maybe the figure is a little bit small, but um, we estimated the synaptic conductance to a neuron, and what you saw was that there's a concurrent excitation inhibition to a given neuron, and this we also verified with applying strychnine onto, so we could block the inhibitory input, and that's what you see at the bottom here. Once you take away inhibition, the neuron spikes more on the peak. And that was contrary to what we expected, because I was expecting to see alternating excitation inhibition. We published this in Science, and there was a very it got a lot of pushback. But it moved us on a track where we say, okay, maybe the interaction in the spinal cord is very similar to what we see in other parts of the nervous system, in particular what people see in the cerebral cortex. And some of the things that people see in the cerebral cortex is these high conductance states, primarily induced by synaptic input. So again, we measure the membrane resistance of a neuron, as illustrated here by injecting current pulses. You can see that the voltage response was diminished as the network activity started. Down here at the bottom, we had the estimated total conductance, and that was similar to something that brought people's attention in the early zeros. Here's a review by Destex et al., where they saw that the cerebral cortex had a what they call a high conductance state. Another thing we looked at was this the spiking activity during such a burst, a rhythmic burst. You can see that here are two different cells that we recorded from. One was very irregular, and the other one was regular. This is something that referred to as fluctuation versus mean driven, depending on whether the mean membrane potential is above threshold or below. If it's below threshold, it's primarily driven by fluctuations, the one you see at the left, resulting in a very irregular activity. So I was curious to see what the network activity was like, and so I bought these Neuronexus probes and inserted them into the spinal cord to see what the population activity was like. And again, we looked at the population firing rate distribution, which looks something like this, where you can see it's a very skewed towards very low frequencies. And if you transform into a logarithmic scale, it looks like a normal distribution. Something again was seen in the cerebral cortex. I'm sure you're familiar with this observation, David. But so the point is that it has the population activity is skewed towards low frequencies, and Roxen et al. Came up with this explanation as a transformation of a Gaussian synaptic activity through a nonlinearity into a more skewed firing rate distribution. So we also saw this nonlinearity in the membrane potential relationship to the firing rate of individual neurons. So, but moving on to the population dynamics, we could record the nerve output. So that was sort of the output from the network, and it looks something like this. We had, this is about a rhythmic scratching movement of the limb, and then we inserted the electrodes, and we recorded a raster that looks like this. So it was the intensity was increased. But it was difficult to see exactly what was going on in the network. The color below is the estimated firing rate. If you look at individual neurons, they will have a rhythmic bursting activity with a certain phase in respect to, some reference. And each neuron seems to have its own phase. So if we sort the raster according to phase, we got something very simple, which is something that looks like a linear sequence almost. So for this reason, we wanted to look at, so this is a time lapse of the same. I don't know if you can hear the sound, but let me just turn it down. So this is a time lapse of the same sort of data, and you can see what you have on the right is the first two principal components of the firing rate distribution. You see it circling around. Because we have representation of all phases in the cycle, we call this rotational dynamics. So we define it as a low-dimensional activity where the population is continuously cycling through all phases during the rhythmic progression, just to demonstrate something that. So this is illustrated data, so it's not real data. But the point is to show that the phase histogram is more or less distributed over all or there are neurons representing all phases, as opposed to something non-rotational where you have a preference of certain phase and then you have a gaps in between. So those are modal presentations. This is also speaking into the direction of manifold description of neural population activity, where you can represent the population activity as a low-dimensional geometrical structure embedded in a very high-dimensional space, and that is reflecting some sort of relationship between the neurons that can be illustrated as a geometrical object. So, and of course, this is inspired by Mark Churchland's work from motor cortex, and also Juan Gallego and Matt Lee Miller, Sarah Sawyer, and many other people that has pushed this idea in the nervous system. So I think it's good to take a step back and look at what the conventional wisdom is of the spinal cord. And it's basically built on an idea from more than 100 years ago, which created by Graham Brown. It's called the half-center model, where you have a flexor extensor module, and by interacting between these modules with reciprocal inhibition, you can have alternating activity between the flexor and extensor. And that's basically what has shaped the modern day comprehension of the spinal cord. It's modules that are interacting with each other in a reciprocal inhibitory fashion and in a feed-forward type of circuitry. In a way, you could see this as the purpose of this is to explain the alternating muscle activity as illustrated here. So at the bottom, we have this is what we know is the output of the network. We have alternating between flexor extensors, and that can be explained by an alternation between two flexor extensor modules. But what we seem to see in the spinal cord while recording the population activity is that it's not alternation between modules. Instead, it's a continuous progression of phases, as you see here. We can explain alternation from a continuous progression if you select what neurons you is giving the output. So in terms of the manifold description, these two contrasting ideas would be represented as either the flip-flopping between 2 points on a line. It doesn't have to be a straight line. It can be curved or something, as opposed to something that's rotating around. So those are the two contrasting ideas. And so what type of network could produce such a rotational dynamics? That was our question. And then we also got inspired by the literature, specifically the theoretical literature on cortical and recurrent neural networks. Here are some of the Cecile and Abbott were able to produce almost, like all the different movement that is associated with locomotion from a recurrent neural network. And also here's Hennequin, Vogels, and Gerstner producing these different structures from a balanced network. So based on this thought of a very simple network that was produced or composed of inhibitory and excitatory neurons, rate-based neurons, where we could change the gain, but otherwise it's balanced. Looking at the eigenvalue spectrum, you can see that changing the gain, you could activate the network in this way. And then we got what you see here. And the rotational dynamics just popped out. We didn't have to do anything; it just came out, and is at the same time is a rhythm generator. So we didn't have to have any sort of rhythmogenic properties of the cells, which is otherwise in the traditional model difficult to get to oscillate without some sort of rhythmogenic property of the cells. Another thing we could generate from this very simple network is multiple motor programs by changing the gain, as you can see over here. If you select the gain differently between different neurons, you can induce different types of rhythmic activity, changing the phase between different readout neurons and that type of thing. So it was very sort of rich behavior that we got for uh, almost for free. But of course, we got a lot of pushback for this because we know the spinal cord is not a random network. So we wanted to do more experiments and try to get a better grasp on what the spinal population activity was like during movement, and also look at more sort of different types of motor programs. And for that, we started to look at rats, which is um, awake rats that can freely move and therefore can produce many types of movement. And so this was the time when the NeuroPixel electrodes started coming. And for those of you who haven't heard about it, it's a type of electrode where you can record hundreds, if not thousands, of neurons. And we plan to put that into the gray matter of the spinal cord, as you can see here. So the task is, or the difficulty is obviously that during locomotion, the animals moves and the vertebra bend. Here's an X-ray movie of a rat that is locomoting. You can see the lumbar spinal cord, which is where controlling the hind limbs, is located here. The vertebra actually don't move that much. So the hope was that we could fuse 3 vertebrae together with dental cement and then insert the electrode into the spinal cord like this. And so we did this, and here's a illustration of a rat with such an implant. And the good news is that they were actually able to locomote if we did it in the appropriate manner. The animal was not affected all that much by this rather invasive procedure. Here you can see a video of we also use markerless tracing of the limbs, so we know approximately where the limb is at all time. Here you can see this is an MRI scanning of the spinal cord afterwards, so you can see where the electrode was. At the bottom, you can see where we put them in at an angle of 30 to 40 degrees, and that means that we know where the neurons are that we record from. And here you can see a typical recording across the different spinal layers. There are 10 layers in the spinal cord, and they serve different function. And the surprising thing is that so this is during freely awake locomoting animal. During this type of activity, there were many neurons that were rhythmically active. It was more than 90% of all the isolated units that were rhythmically active. Somewhat surprising, I think. Here are some examples of units. So what you have on these rasters, it's each line is a repeating step, so you can get an idea about how stable the phase response of a given neuron is. So they were very dedicated to bursting at a particular phase, the individual neuron, and that means that we can also take the mean firing rate across steps, and in this way get a pooled overview of all the neurons that we record from, and then sort them according to the phase, and that's what you see here. So what you see is that it's a very almost continuous or almost uniform representation of all phases. We also did some statistics. We don't have to go into this, but the point is that the rotational dynamics that we saw in turtle is very much also present in rats during locomotion. So we wanted to move on, and I promised you to talk about stopping also, and how the spinal cord or how networks can produce such a stopping without and sustain the activity so that the animal doesn't collapse, for example, or we don't collapse when we stop. The first working model for this is that you have this rhythmic sequence of activity, and then you want to stop somewhere, and they just sort of stop in that particular part of the cycle as sort of the in neural space, it finds a fixed point on the cycle, and then it stays there until we want to resume the locomotion. So that's kind of the mental idea we had before we started this. So just to show some data, so here's a natural stopping of the animal, and you can see the sequential progression during the stepping, and then it stops, and then you can see that there's a sustained activity. It's not as beautiful as the working model that I showed before, but you can see there are some neurons that sustain their activity, and then other neurons that become quiet. Okay, so in terms of the neural state space, during locomotion, we see that it circles around just as when the turtle was producing its rhythmic activity. We call this the locomotor manifold. Um, and during stopping, the trajectory moves into this other type of manifold, which is not circular but more solid. So if we calculate the topologic metrics of this, it's a solid object, whereas the locomotor manifold is more like a ring. It's a solid ring. We call this the postural manifold. We wanted to be able to control the stopping, so we know exactly when the stopping starts, because this is all voluntary stopping. So we don't know when the animal decided to stop. It would be interesting to see when you stop, when you induce the stopping, and when it actually occurs. If there's any sort of inertia or what the response time is. So there is a region in the brainstem known as PPN that if you stimulate it, you can induce stopping. And that's so we injected a virus into this region, and then we had an optical fiber. And you can see when the light comes on here, this is a rat standing on its hind limb. So when we stimulate with light, it's just suspended. It stops its movement. And we could use this while recording from the spinal cord and see what the spinal network response was. And here you see, so here you have a rat locomoting, and during this blue regions, that's when we stimulate the PPN and induce the stop. And in the PCA, in the neural space, you can see it circles around this rotational dynamics. And then when we stimulate, it moves into a fixed point where it stays throughout the period of stimulation. Once we stop the stimulation, it resumes back and circles around again. So here's a couple of trials. You can see the raster more clearly here. At the bottom, we have the kinematic metrics, so you can see the animal stops. And in the neural state space, we see it circles around, and then it moves into this postural manifold. Here's because we can do this many times, we can align trajectories together and then see how they all collapse into this postural manifold. So that's what you see in the middle. It's a non-trivial collection, or it's a collection of non-trivial fixed points. So they're next to each other, and they're not just representing noisy variability or something. They stay within a fixed point, and the next time you do it, they stay at different place, and the variability around the fixed point is much smaller than the size of the postural manifold. We wanted to investigate a little bit more what the stability of points were in the postural manifold. So we did this perturbation experiment where we perturbed the animal with a little jerk on the treadmill that the animal's walking on. And that's what you see here. So during the PPN stimulation, the animal freezes, and then we perturb the treadmill. You can see that it induces a temporary increase in the firing rate, which decays back down afterwards. Over here, you have the mean firing rate, and for many trials, mean for the whole population. And if you look at the state space trajectory during the perturbation, it moves out of the postural manifold, and then it decays back again to the postural manifold, but to a slightly different point. To investigate further the sort of the attractor properties of both the postural and the locomotor manifold, we wanted to use Lyapunov exponents, and we could do this because we had many trajectories representing different times, but we could see how they converge or diverge from each other. So the Lyapunov exponent is if you take two sample traces or trajectories at some instance in time, you can see how they either move closer to each other or move farther away from each other over time. As a exponential fit, either it grows exponentially or it decays exponentially. So doing that for many different trajectories under the three conditions of either locomotion during a PPN stimulation where it diverges into the postural manifold, or during that perturbation that I was talking about. So first, during locomotion, it seems to be centered around zero, which means that it neither diverges nor converges. They just sort of follow each other, which kind of makes sense when you look at the locomotor manifold. The trajectories, they move along in parallel with each other, more or less. They don't converge towards each other. They don't diverge. So we consider this a collection of limit cycles, because if they're outside the manifold, they will diverge into them, or they will converge into them to the manifold. But once they're inside, they don't sort of converge or diverge. They just move in parallel. But once we stimulate with PPN, then they converge onto this postural manifold as seen here. And the same for the perturbation experiments. Once they're perturbed out, they will decay back into the postural manifold. So conclusion here is that we have a locomotor manifold has behavior similar to a limit cycle attractor, but they're not a single line. They're like a collection of limit cycles very close to each other. And then the postural manifold is a set of fixed points. So what type of network can produce such a behavior, both be able to produce rotational dynamics, but also be able to converge onto a fixed point? So we got inspired by the literature again, and there's this notion of a ring attractor where you have local excitation and then longer range inhibition. And the reason this is interesting is because it can produce a bump of activity that's stable, that doesn't move. So that is similar to keeping posture in a steady position. If the projections from that area, if it becomes asymmetric somehow, then the bump will start moving around. So as you can see here, so you can turn this into a rhythm generator or sequence generator just by changing slightly the weight of the projections. So that was the idea, that that we get inspired by this ring attractor. We open it up because the spinal cord is not shaped like a ring. It's shaped more like a one-dimensional object. So if we open up the ring, like here, we can have local excitation and then longer range inhibition. And this is also known as the Mexican hat, because you have a top in excitation locally, and then wings that go to inhibition on the side. So the question is, what type of projections are localized in the spinal cord? What we can do is, well, first of all, look at what other people have found, and um, if if we inject a virus locally in the spinal cord, we can see where the cell bodies project to, and that's what we did here. This is a tissue cleared spinal cord. We did a little generic virus injection just to show also the complexity of the spinal cord. This is a mouse spinal cord, by the way. You can see the cell bodies here, and then both the axons and dendrites from these cell bodies. You can see located here. They project many places, but this is also a generic virus injection. If we choose, this is data from Claudia Cafe from the Cortine lab, injected a Cre-dependent virus into that then got expressed in a glutamatergic type of cell known as VSX2. And here you can see that they have a asymmetric projection towards the tail. Tail is to the right. So the point is that we don't know exactly all the different cell types where they project or their projection profile, but some of them have projections both locally and long range, and they're likely to be asymmetric. So what if if we're located at a specific location in the spinal cord, and there are cells that are both there are cells that are excitatory, then there are cells that are inhibitory, and together they form this Mexican hat type of projection in the rostrocaudal direction of the spinal cord. And the reason it would be beneficial if that's the case is because the corticospinal or descending fibers from the brain and elsewhere, they are typically connecting to cells based on their genetic identity. So that way, if we control the different the sensitivity of different cell types, we can control the shape of this Mexican hat. We call it the projectome. So doing that, here's a simulation where you see the projectome at the top right here, and then it causes this traveling wave. If we change the weight or the sensitivity of both ascending inhibition and descending inhibition, we can change both the speed of the rhythm generation and also we can also change the amplitude. It's not shown here though, but we can basically stop a traveling bump at a certain location by changing the lobes of this projectile. Here's another simulation doing basically the same thing. You can see this is sort of simulating the NeuroPixel recording. So if we change the shape of the projectome, we can capture a bump that's traveling at a certain location. And why would this be useful for the generation of movement? It turns out that this is the model again. This is the eigenmodes, the spatial eigenmodes, and it turns out that the different motor neuron pools representing flexor extensors are located in a sequence that makes sense in terms of locomotion. So if you had let's say a default activity pattern or activity representing locomotion that we do most of the time, then this could easily be generated by a traveling wave moving in one direction. So yeah, and then so modeling this, just recording. Let's say we do a virtual recording, we would see this locomotor manifolds similar to what we see in experiments from this. So that would explain rotation. What about stopping? So it can be done by different ways. One is, inhibiting a cell type known as V1. It can do stopping as seen here. You can also do it, you can either excite the descending inhibition, for example, and multiple other ways. So it gives a lot of flexibility. We can also control the amplitude and that type of thing. So here's a simulation of this. So this is a time lapse. So during locomotion, it circles around on that locomotor manifold. And then when we change the sensitivity of certain cell types, it will move into this postural manifold. It's a virtual postural manifold. So, okay, we're almost done. So this was so it looks like networks in the spinal cord has attractor dynamics, either limit cycle dynamics or fixed point attractors. And this can be explained if we imagine a Mexican hat-like projectile in the rostrocaudal direction. And the shape of this projectile is a convenient way to control the different aspects of movement. And cell types would then play the role of changing the shape of the projectile. So that's where we are now. And I want to thank everyone, our funding agencies, and everyone involved, in particular Salif Komi, who's up here, and August, done a lot of work on the data analysis and the modeling, and everyone else, Grace Hauser and Martin Carpetano for the tissue clearing. If you're interested in preprints of this, we have two preprints. One is the experimental one with some modeling, and then we have a pure modeling one here. With that, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.